Today's the day. We're going to turn this frame into this couch. We're going to show you the easiest way possible to do it with the tools most people have at home. Hopefully it's pretty simple, pretty easy. So we're going to start by breaking this into 4 steps. We have your bottom or your decking, we have your arms, we have your back, and finally we have your cushion. So let's go over the tools and materials we'll need to get that started. You need a way to put in the staples, take out the staples, cut foam and fabric, and put things together and mark things. For staplers, you don't really need anything intense. This is a $40 staple gun from Home Depot that works on compressed air. But if you don't have like a compressor, you can just get like an electric staple gun, and that's probably your best bet. You'll definitely need a good pair of scissors, but for cutting foam, we have an electric saw at the shop, but you could use like a wood saw or a dollar store knife, something that you can grind a serrated edge on. If you don't have a grinder, you can use a hacksaw blade from Harbor Freight. So if you're starting from bare bones wooden springs to fully upholstered, this is everything you'll need. If your current upholstery project still has foam in good condition, you can reuse that and you don't need to buy it. Along the way, we'll show you how to substitute some of these materials if you don't want to buy more. And everything here will have a link in the description where you can buy them. So for this tutorial, we will be using an industrial sewing machine, but a home sewing machine will work just fine if you don't use really dense or thick fabrics like vinyl or leather. If you're interested in an industrial machine, you can probably find one on like Facebook Marketplace or a secondhand website. And if you're interested in a tutorial that doesn't use a sewing machine at all, leave us a comment. And if we get enough comments, we'll do a tutorial on no sewing. Okay, so our first step is going to be pulling these springs to the side just to make it a little more even. We just have a piece of scrap fabric here. So we're going to tie one string up here, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about that because we've already done an in-depth tutorial on springing and tying them. So right now we're putting webbing and FLW down here. And the point of that is to kind of give it like shape and structure, because without it, you don't have anything here for the fabric and the foam to sit on. If you don't have webbing and FLW and you don't want to go out and buy some, what you can do is add some like scrap fabric and just pull it really tight, or cardboard, but like a more firm cardboard. Any of that will work in a pinch. All your main goal is just to add support for everything. I'm gonna fold this over. So you don't need to take any measurements or anything. You just take off a little more than you think you need. Fold everything underneath just to make it look a little bit neater. And then right up against the edge of this, same thing. If it's loose, you're going to kind of hear it when you put your arm up against it, or it might just be too soft. So you want to pull it really tight. Like, just use the strength in your arm and hand. You don't really have to put your whole body weight into it. In fact, if you're putting your body weight into it, it's going to be too tight. Gonna tuck this back here. Now we're coming up on what, in my opinion, is the hardest part of any upholstery, and it's knowing where to cut things. Because if you cut too far or too deep into a lot of parts, it's going to show. But this is a good area to kind of practice on, because nothing you cut here is going to show. So you have a hard corner right here. Take your fabric and fold it diagonally, perpendicularly. One of those two. And then you're going to cut directly to it once it's folded, stopping just a little bit before you get to the wood. Then when you fold it down, it's going to line up straight across that wood, and you don't have to worry about anything. Then you do the same thing. You're going to pull it really tight everywhere you can. Trim off the majority of the excess. Staple all this down. You don't need to do as many staples here. You're just trying to hide some of that. So that's what you want it to look like. You want firmness. You don't want anything to sink too deep. Like, you can see it has a little give, but just because it's stretching. If you don't have FLW and you don't want to buy anymore, again, you can just use a piece of fabric. See right here, we have a square spot that's blocking us from pulling anything tight. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna fold the fabric again perpendicular to the piece. You're gonna take your scissors and cut straight towards it, but you're gonna stop about maybe half an inch before it hits the wood. And then you're gonna cut diagonally from where you stopped towards the corner of the wood, making a tiny triangle. It's always best to undercut, but you can kind of test it by putting your fingers down. Is that gonna sit or is it gonna bunch up? And then you'll go a little bit farther if it bunches up. If not, staple it, call it good. So now, you're gonna do the same thing. Cut it right down to the corner, test it, see if you need to cut any further. Here's a better example of it bunching up. See how it's got that wrinkle? So you'll cut it a little bit further. The wrinkle's gone, and you can tuck that little triangle right there. There might be a little bit of a gap between the wood and the FLW, but it's nothing major, so it's gonna work. If you have a big gap, you might want to retry, but I didn't have a big gap. Okay, so right now we're going to be adding on our edge rolls so that we can take better measurements for the fabric that goes on our decking. Edge roll is this little piece of foam or styrofoam, kind of looks like that. And it just goes right here, and it's so when you sit down you don't feel this hard wood edge. You're going to want to use longer staples for this. Normally what we use for any upholstery in general is 3/8 inch, but for this we use 9/16. Just doing temporary staples right now, just one every few inches, because I know I'll have to take it off in a second to staple down the fabric the way we're doing it. Right here, we have these corners. We're just gonna cut that 45 right in them. And we know that the next piece is gonna have a 45 to kind of complement it, just like that. Our decking is made up of two pieces. One piece that's a square, and it's generally made out of scrap fabric. It's really easy to get this measurement. You just take the area of your chair at its widest point, and you add like 3 or 4 inches to that, to each dimension. For ours, we have a 28.5 by 29. So we'll just add 3 inches to both dimensions and get 32 by 31.5. This rectangular piece is our fabric, the one that looks nice that you bought for this chair. And that one's also really simple to get measurements for. You'll measure from where the arm stops to the very front of the chair. So here I have 6 3/4 of an inch, and then you'll add 2 inches to that. And that way you have extra to pull back. You'll do the same thing for the other side. So 8 3/4 times 2, 17.5. And then you'll add that to the front dimension, which is 28.5. So 36, 37, something like that. For the height of your piece, you'll want to go from the bottom of the chair to the top of the edge roll. So here we have 8 inches. And then you'll want to go 6.5 inches back. Now I've already marked a line that's 6.5 inches on this. You can do that as well, but that just makes it easier for you to know. So I know it's 14.5 for sure. And then you'll add 2 inches to the bottom, and that way you have room to pull and seam allowance accounted for. So 16.5 total. So let's go cut those out. So now we have our two pieces of fabric. We have our fabric one and our scrap one. Out of our fabric one, we need to cut two 90-degree triangles so that we can stitch it together and actually have a piece of fabric that wraps around the front. So you're going to take those center notches we cut out already. You're going to line it up with the centers you marked out on your chair earlier. I'm just going to put a temporary staple in mine to hold it. Then you're going to take this fabric and wrap it around the side like it's hugging the chair. That's the one. And then you'll pull this top piece down, trying to make another square that'll let you get your markings out. So now we have a square here. You're going to take your pencil or your chalk and you're going to mark a few different points. One right here where it kind of ends the square. One on the very corner. So you have those marks. And connect those dots. I'm using the 90-degree angle to show me where to go. So now we have our lines. We're going to fold it in half right on that point. Line up these two so they kind of overlap each other. And now we're going to go sew it and test it on our piece before we do the other half. So as I get to the end of this corner here, I'm going to add a curve onto it so that it sits better on the foam we're going to add to the sofa. It's not going to fit perfectly right now because we still have to add some foam on there, but I'm lining up the center on our center. It goes right up to the corner of our edge roll. So now we'll do the same process to the other side, knowing that this side is right. Mark out that corner. So now we have both sides sewn for these corners. We're going to just test fit it just to make sure everything went right. Now you can see ours is a little loose. That's okay because we're going to be adding foam. So it's going to stretch it out a ½ inch that way, a ½ inch that way, a ½ inch towards me, and we're going to lose a ½ inch for the seam allowance. So it's all going to tighten up a lot. Right now we're going to mark it onto the other piece of fabric that we cut out for this. Then we're going to sew it onto that before we attach all of it and add the foam and all the soft stuff. We know our fabric goes 6½ inches back from the front of the chair. We also need about 1.5 inches to staple onto. So we're going to measure back 8 inches. You're also going to mark the center of your fabric. Then you're going to set this on top here. Line everything up and mark where that fabric stops. Same thing for the other side. Gonna mark where the fabric stops. And now we're gonna go up, 2 inches? You can see our fabric lines up pretty well on these marks. So now we're going to flip the fabric over so that it's upside down, line it up on those chalk lines we just set up, and sew a ½ inch behind the line, giving us a ½ inch seam allowance, making sure to pivot on those corners so that the fabric folds backwards. So now as you get to this corner, you're going to slow down as you approach it. And once you hit the seam that we sewed earlier, you're going to stop the needle and bury it all the way through the fabric. And then you're going to lift up the sewing foot, cut 2 to 3 cuts in the corner of the fabric, which will let it turn easier. And then you'll rotate the fabric 90 degrees and line it up with the next line before you just keep going. I have everything sewn up right now except for these little sides that kind of flap loose. You don't really want that, so we're going to put a top stitch on these. So just fold it along that line. Doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just sewing that top stitch on, keeping it. It doesn't have to go too far. It definitely doesn't have to be perfect. All right, so now we've got our decking completely sewn. We're going to add some cotton to the base so that you don't see the springs at all. You could also use a few layers of Dacron, but cotton's just, it's simpler. You add a layer of cotton and it's done. So now we have our cotton on there and our decking on top. We're going to do our best to line it up, keeping this notch we put in central, and we're going to pull it evenly side to side. Also, make sure that the seam is 6 inches back from the front of the chair. We are going to attach the square piece of the decking to the base of the chair, just like we did with the FLW, except we're going to staple it to the top of the front of the frame. Remember to cut the tan fabric to go around the arms, just like we did earlier. So for this corner of the arm, you're going to cut in diagonally towards the front and stop at that corner, instead of cutting straight down and then making your triangle. The order to staple this down is you're going to staple down the center points of the front, the back, and then the sides before you fully staple down the front, fully staple down the back, and then the sides. Now you can reattach the edge roll permanently and then measure for the foam. We'll just use 1/2 inch foam for this, and it should be big enough to go from the bottom of the frame up to our seam line. We'll also cut it to match the seam of the decking, and we'll slice off a 45-degree corner along the edge to taper it. So we've got our foam cut out. Before you add in your cotton, you're going to line up this chamfer you've put on it with this seam allowance. You're going to glue directly on there. I'll demonstrate how I'm cutting it on this side. Tuck in a little bit of foam under here. And then the same thing I was doing earlier, except now I'm going to cut kind of diagonally to that point and then cut the Y so that everything just fits nice and neat. We've added in our cotton right here, and it's just enough so that when we pull our foam down, it's nice and smooth. If you add too much, it's going to be really bumpy, and if you don't add enough, you're going to have a little bit of a hollow bit here. Not really trying to pull it tight, just trying to pull it smooth. So now you can cut it along the edge roll here and glue these two pieces together. Be sure to make a round edge so the fabric flows down, and then we'll repeat these steps on the other side. You got the foam, it's nice and smooth. At this point, if you wanted to add Dacron to it, you could. And Dacron would make everything smoother. So if you did a rough job here, go ahead and add it. We're not going to. You're going to be pulling your fabric tight with one hand. Use your other hand to kind of like brush alongside it and smooth it all out. And you're going to go down to the bottom. Try and hold the foam tight against the wood. And then just staple up. You'll want to stretch the fabric and put staples in a few places around the bottom. Make sure you get the corners sitting nice. Any staples close to the legs will most likely be removed and replaced when we get to finishing the fabric on the outside of the legs. You'll want the foam to be compressed to the edge of the frame. Sometimes you'll have to remove and redo staples. This happens all the time, so don't be afraid of it. No staple is permanent. I'm cutting out a piece of tack strip to hold down the fabric on the outside of the legs. I taped a piece of cardboard to the outside just to make it a bit softer. Line up the top edge of the tack strip exactly where you want the fabric to end on the leg. Then poke the tacks through and flip the strip upside down and hammer it in. On the remaining side, just fold the fabric and pull it tight to the back and underneath before stapling. Once you get the legs finished, you may have to readjust the previous fabric and staples. Just remove whatever staples are wrinkling and restaple them. So we're all done with the decking, and it's looking pretty good so far. I'm liking how it sits. Now we're going to move on to step 2, which is the arms. In order to do the arms, we're going to finish the base for our foam all of it, sew the cover, assemble. Here we are cutting out a piece of 1/2 inch foam that is smaller than the inside arm. When we add the other foam on top of it, it will round out and give it a full look. We are going to use 1 inch foam for the rest of the arm. First, I'll cut out a square to cover the inside of the arm, going from the front and top of the wood and tucking back and below the arm. Next, we'll measure the front of the arm with the inside foam on, then cut and glue it on. Finally, we'll repeat the same process for the top of the arm. This is the best way to foam the arm for longevity. For the Dacron, you could repeat the same steps as you did for the foam. However, I like to do it all in one piece and simply fold it over and cut and glue where I need to. We have our arms all foamed up, and they have Dacron as well. And now we're going to cut out the fabric for our slip cover. It's pretty much just 3 pieces. You have your inside, your center, and your outside. You'll want to take all your measurements before you put Dacron on, but the only one that needs to be really precise is the width of the centerpiece. You'll want that to be the exact same width as the foam, plus 1 inch for the seam allowance, which is 1/2 inch on each side. Let's start with the outside piece. For the outside piece, you're going to want to measure from here to the back to get your width and add 2 to 3 inches depending on how much pull room you want, as well as from the top to the bottom plus 2 or 3 inches for pull room, and a 1/2 inch seam allowance wherever you have sewing. So let's say this is 20, you're going to add 2 to 3 inches to the back, so that's 22, plus a 1/2 inch for sewing, 22 and a half. For the inside piece, It's the exact same measurements as the outside, as long as you have enough to pull it from the back and the bottom. If you don't have enough to pull it from the bottom, you can sew on, optionally, a little piece of scrap fabric that we call a fabric pull, or you can add more to the height of the piece so you can pull it better. The last piece we want to talk about is this centerpiece. Now you can have it as just one strip that runs along the whole way. We call that waterfalling, but aesthetically we wanted a seam right on this corner, so we just measured that out and cut it along the corner. The last thing we need to talk about is something called crowning. We're not going to add crowning onto it. However, it is a good choice. It makes everything look more full, but to keep this video simple, we're not going to add it. Mark has a video on this if you want to go check that out. We have all of our pieces cut out, and now we can start sewing them together. We'll start by sewing the pull to the bottom of the inside piece, and then by sewing both of our center pieces together to make one long piece. Then we'll sew the center piece to either one of the sides, being careful to line up the corner of the side piece to the seam we sewed on our center piece. Now sew the rest of this piece together and add the final side piece, again being careful to line up the corner of the side piece to the seam of the center piece. Some things to note: it's got a lot of wrinkles from the sewing. A lot of those will come out when you steam it at the very end, but for now we're just going to leave it and we'll do all the steaming at the very end. You got the arms done. Something important that you'll want to know is that this seam and these corners are perfectly even and opposite to each other. You don't want it to be angled at all. That's going to be really noticeable, unless that's your style, in which case do what you want. You get it all test fitted, and then using the same things we talked about earlier, you know, with the cutting and temporary staples, you're going to put it on as best as you can, making sure to pull it back as tight as you can and down pretty tight. Cut to the arm using the Y method again, being very careful not to cut too much. Always cut less, check it, and then cut a little more and check again. Push the fabric all the way to the wood that you want to cut around, fold it back on itself, and then cut carefully all the way to the wood. Then stuff the fabric through on either side of the wood. And you just pull it a little bit taut underneath. Going to trim off anything that I can. Yeah, you can see that the pull is just, it just makes it easier to grab things. It's not necessarily going to stay in the couch. What I can't trim, I'm going to fold into it And then I'm going to seal it all up. So this seam, you want it to be really straight, aesthetically pleasing. You can eyeball it, you can measure it out to be exact. I like to put some markers in place so I know what I'm aiming for. You can see how they're about the same place in the 3 spots. And now I'll take my hand and pull it all nice and straight. Anytime you're pulling a lot of fabric, you'll want to use your hand whenever possible to smooth it out. Smooth it over. Smooth it over. You can see we still have some wrinkles, but when you pull it from the side, all of those should come right out if you did it right. Something to note is that the firmness of the arm, it should be pretty firm. You can see me pulling really tight back and really tight down, but you don't want it to be so tight that it's about to snap. You just want it to be comfortable and you don't want any of the fabric shifting around. So right now we got to deal with this extra piece of fabric. 2 ways you can do it. The easiest way is tack strip right here. If you don't want to buy tack strip, you can just fold this underneath, pull it down really tight, and try and get rid of any wrinkles and staple it underneath. Really simple. But we'll show how to do the tack strip right now. Just adding a little bit of cardboard to the back keeps everything soft. You just make sure we have the right amount. Okay, nice. So now we're going to add the tack strip, which will make everything look nice and neat and square here. Essentially a folded line. The way we're going to do that is, if you want your tack strip to go right there, just straight down, you're going to take this, and you're going to put it on the other side of where you want it. So I know I want mine right here, because it's going to flip under. You'll see how that works in a second. And then you're going to pull it over. I always like to just do every other one to start with, because you're going to readjust it as you go. Now you've got an essentially pretty straight line. You're going to fold it all after you make sure all the fabric is pushed down. Fold it all. And there you go. You can see it. It's got a really straight line there right now. Nothing in the way. Put it exactly where you want it. We've got the arms done. Now we got to do the back. We have to fill in these gaps. You may also have a gap in your chairs. You can fill that in with FLW or scrap fabric. we're just gonna use cardboard because that's simple. And basically we just want something that can hold the foam and cotton for the back. So we'll catch back up around that point. We had some really dense foam lying around, so we used it to even out the back. We're doing this because of the modifications we made to our frame, but if you didn't make any modifications, you really won't need to do something like this. Here I'm adding a layer of cotton to help round out the foam that goes up on top, similar to the way we did on the arms. Now we are going to measure and cut the foam for the back. We are using a 2-inch foam that is light and comfortable. We'll cut out a square and then adjust it to the actual chair. At this point, I like to add a cardboard strip underneath the foam, just barely hanging off for 2 reasons. The first is that it makes the outback we're going to add on later look really clean when we add a second piece of cardboard. And the second reason is that it makes that top line easier to find when you're doing that outback. Now we'll cut out a piece of 1/2-inch foam and glue it to the top. So now we're going to cut and sew the fabric for the back, which is arguably the hardest part. The first piece, piece number 1, is the most important to get right with dimensions. You can either be super careful with how you measure it, or you can take a template, which is what we'll be doing here today. The second piece is pretty simple. You're just going to want to do the dimensions of the top, plus 1.5 inches for a pull, plus a 1/2 inch for the seam allowance. Piece 3 and 4, you can template, but if you have enough fabric, it's easier to just do a big old square. So like plus 2 or 3 inches, as long as it wraps around the back. Pieces 5 and 6 are just fabric pulls. They can be made out of scrap fabric or your show fabric. We're going to be cutting our first piece a little bit longer than we need, so we have enough room to pull it through the bottom, but you could do another pull on the bottom. So right here, I'm just putting a very small spot of glue to hold the template in place. So I'm going to line up my scrap fabric to the top of the chair and try to smooth it out as best as I can so there's no wrinkles. Then basically I'm going to trace the back around the arms, getting it as close as I can to the edges and marking the corners. Sometimes I'll make cuts close to the arms so I can get better lines. I want it to be as accurate as I can make it so that I can get a piece of fabric that matches it perfectly. So we've got all our pieces cut out. 1, 2, 3, 4. We also have 2 pulls that we may or may not use depending on if these are long enough. First step, we're going to attach pieces 2, 3, and 4, making one long strip. We'll mark the center of piece 2, line it up with the center of this, and then we'll make extra sure that our corners line up and attach all of it in one go. For pieces 3 and 4, you'll want to keep sewing around the curves for the arms as far down as the side pieces will go. We've got our cover all sewn. We have our corners looking pretty nice. We can make them look a little bit nicer later with an ice pick. And we've sewn around the little arm dent, whatever you want to call it. So you can see our corners of our cover match up with the corners of the foam. Our arms are a little bit tall, but once we start pulling it down, it'll all work out. So now we'll put the Dacron on, attach the cover permanently, and go from there. So now pretty much you're just going to use all the things we've taught you along the way, cutting the cover to fit around the wood in the frame, pulling, stapling, redoing things, just trying to make it look right in general. Probably start right here. You want to see that line pretty clearly. So now it's time to make our buttons and put them on the couch, which is pretty simple. We have a machine here in the shop that helps us make these buttons. But at home, you can get this little craft button supply kit from like Amazon or a craft store. It's pretty simple to use. Now it's time to install the buttons. You're going to need a really long tufting needle for this and button twine. I like to have really long pieces of twine so I can pull and tie them easily, about a foot or so. You're going to thread the button onto the twine and center it before you put both ends of the twine through the eye of the needle, about 6 inches on each side. Then you'll put the needle into the marked spot and pull it all the way through until the threads are hanging out the back and the button is stuck in front. To tie off buttons, we are using leftover button shanks. You could also use any extra buttons or get creative with wood or fabric, even foam. The knot I'm tying here is a bit complicated, but a normal slip knot will work just fine. As you tie the button, you'll pull it, then look around the front to make sure it's as deep or as shallow as you want it. When it's in the place you want, you'll tie one more normal knot to secure it. And that's what we'll do for the rest of these buttons. We've got all the buttons done. We've got the arms done, the decking done. All that's left is the outback, which is the very, very back panel of the chair, and the cushion. There is an in-depth tutorial by Mark on how to do the cushion cover, so we're not going to go into that super deep. We're just going to show you how to do the foam, but to do that you need the template. So let's do that. For this template, it's the same basic thing as the previous template we made. One thing to note is that you want the chalk lines that mark the inner arms and back to line up with the narrowest parts of those surfaces. Otherwise, the cushion may be too big. For a more in-depth tutorial on how to make the seat template, you can check out Mark's video. Template is done. Fits the couch great. And now we're going to go use it to cut out the foam. I'm trying to smooth out the fabric as I go. And now I'm going to really carefully trace along here. I'm noticing with this one that our couch is kind of curved that way. That'll happen sometimes. Things warp with time, and that was a pretty old chair. What's important is that your template fits more than it is symmetrical. Because our couch isn't symmetrical, I'm going to mark which side is the top. We have our piece all cut out, but I wanted to mention real quick, you can save bigger chunks of foam like these and glue them all together and make another piece just as big or for a different chair or whatever, as long as you do really well at lining up the seams so that you don't feel any divots. We got our foam on here and it's fitting pretty nice. You can see it's pretty consistent with holding tight to the arms on both sides. For the front, you want it to line up with the front of the chair so that when you put the Dacron on, only the Dacron is making it push forward. You can see here, it kind of sticks out a little too much on each side. So we're gonna adjust for that by marking it with chalk. You'll drag and trace a line up across the front and you'll trim it as needed. So this is looking a lot better. So now it's time to put the Dacron on. We'll set it down on top of the roll and basically just cut out a big square that's enough to wrap around both sides and the front of the foam. General rule is you don't want any Dacron on a surface that's touching the couch. So for this chair, we won't put it on the inside arm or the back because there's a zipper. You don't want to pull it tight, just lay it down on top, because if it's too tight, it can make the foam kind of sit weird, like it'll pull it in a U shape. Boom! Boom, baby. We're on to the last step, which is the outback. Before you do the outback, you'll want to make sure everything's on the inside is as good as you can get it. So trim where you need to, work out any wrinkles you may have. We have a few up here that we'll get out. We'll show you how to do the rest. It's not too hard from here. I can just, so I will cut diagonally, an ice pick to kind of poke it up. So we messed up a little bit again in these last steps. You can see that the Dacron is already on the chair. Just pretend that it's not and it's an empty back, and follow the steps as we do them in the video since we correct it later. Right against that cardboard. To hold the FLW. So because it curves, you're going to start with one side. Now back on. So we have our tack strip here. You'll notice earlier I cut a 45-degree angle in this cardboard. You'll want to do a 45 on here as well, but you'll want to do it to match this. So picture it upside down, which is where it's going to end up. That 45 is going to go that way. We'll cut that 45, and then we'll hold it up here, and it matches. So now you're going to press the edge of this against the wood, right where it's lining up. And then don't pull too hard to the side, but give it a little bit of a tug and poke one part through, trying your best to keep the tack strip in the same place. It might take a few tries, but then you're going to go down every other spike. It's only going to go about halfway down the spike itself. And then once you get a little distance away, you can go back and push the other ones fully in. This does take a few tries to get right, or to learn how to do it right. I have done my fair share of mistakes on an Outback. So we've got it folded now. You can see we have a lot of fabric here, a lot that's going to bunch up. So what you can do is you can kind of see where it tucks in right there. Kind of going to go underneath and up to that point where it tucks in. And then you're going to go a little bit below, kind of cutting a triangle up to that point. Remove that, fold it over, and then just kind of pull your tack strip to the side. See if it lines up with that wood you have on the side. For me, mine does. Mine lines up great. So I'm going to take my ice pick. I'm going to tuck it down. See, I have a little cardboard sticking out. So I'll go ahead and cut that. I'm going to trim this just a little bit. You're going to hammer it down. Now you're going to want to go as straight towards it as you can, unless it's veering a little bit side to side, and then you'll compensate. But if you've lined everything up, it shouldn't really be going side to side. Tap it in about halfway, pull it over, pull it over. So far everything's lining up great, so I'll go back up to the top, hammer it down. And you're going to repeat till you're all the way at the bottom. Once you carefully get the tack strip set in place all the way down, come back through and make sure it's all secure like I'm doing here. You might have a little bit of Dacron sticking out. And you're either going to try and tear it out or tuck it in. If it doesn't tuck, tear it. Using your hand, hold it flat against the corner, add some staples. When you get to the leg, you're going to cut almost at a diagonal. You're going to cut diagonally, just a little bit in front where you want that to stop. You're going to tuck it down again. You're going to pull it down really tight. That should put a lot of pressure right here and hold it down as well. For the dust cover on bottom, you'll fold and staple on the middle of each side, kind of like you're making a cross, and then you'll pull and staple to the corners, making sure to fold and tuck everything. Chairs are all done. There are a few things you can learn from here, a few mistakes, but the best part of making things is improving and making them better the next time. Remember to like and subscribe so I get paid. That's pretty much it. So get out of here. Go home like me. Goodbye.